if, and insert offensive comment here. So it's an interesting dynamic when you're trying to write particularly about a culture or a faith that you may not be a part of. But the key to being able to enter into that world is to immerse yourself in that world. And multicultural writing, or writing from a diverse perspective, is no different than the writing that we all do day in and day out. There was this beautiful quote that I wanted to share with you, which said, "All writing is about crossing boundaries. Good writers learn how to inhabit the skins of others, even those whose life experiences are very different from their own." So in a very real sense, the skills you need to successfully write across cultures are the same skills you need to master in order to be a good writer, regardless of your subject. And I find that this holds incredibly true. We all have different experiences. We've all experienced the world in different ways. We all come from our own worldview. And we can put that into our writing. We can incorporate that into our writing, and that in itself makes it more authentic. But what happens when you do want to step outside yourself and you want to write in a voice that may not be natural to you, that may not be what you lived or what you grew up with, but you identify that there is an issue out there and you need a character in your book that represents a certain culture or a faith or an ethnic minority? What do? First of all, it's about literary anthropology, being able to immerse yourself and study the people of that culture. Please don't try to write a book about Muslims just by watching Fox News. Focus on the people themselves. Get to know someone of that faith or that background. Immerse yourself in that culture. Go to little towns and areas that may be known for having, a diverse group of people that you want to write into your stories. There's a beautiful little passage, if you have a chance to read it. It's called The Nasarima by Horace Minor. And it was written quite some time ago, in the 1950s, I believe. Horace Minor is a sociologist, and he wrote about this culture, this exotic culture, where people would, bake their heads in little ovens in order to make their hair look nice, where people would lacerate their faces with sharp objects in the pursuit of looking clean, where people would use hog hairs with some magical potions on them to rub them inside their teeth. Sounds like a strange culture, right? But when we look at the word Nasarima and we spell it backwards, we see that it actually spells American. And what he was describing in that moment was, women who go to hairdressers and put their heads in the hair dryer. Us as humans, back then in the 1950s, I guess the bristles might have been looking like hog hairs on the toothbrushes with the toothpaste on top. The lacerating of the face would be the shaving, of course. And yet for someone that steps outside of the culture and looks at our American culture with different eyes, it can become something strange, something exotic. And we tend to do this with other cultures that we don't belong to. We tend to look at them as the other, and that can seep into our writing if we're not careful. So focus on that immersion, but not just the verbal immersion. It's not just speaking to someone, but it's about understanding the nonverbal as well. Looking at how people stand next to each other. How close or how far away do they stand next to each other in that culture? How do children interact with their parents? What are the politics of touch? What are gender relations all about in that society? See the culture, understand it, smell it, taste it, eat the foods, move in with a family that may be willing to adopt you for a couple of months, but find the culture, and that's how you find your voice. Also, of course, learning how to speak in the same tongue. I often get questions from people about, Arabic words. Did I say this right? Is this what it means in the culture? How about this? Is this a phrase that's normally said? But for each of us when we're writing, whether we're writing children's books or YA or middle grade or adult, there is a language that we need to adopt. And I put some of these words up there: BRB, TGIF, see you later, LMAO, FO, XPG, I don't know, whatever my teens are texting these days, But all of this texting language, it's something that's also found its way into our writing, into our stories that we tell, because it's part of the culture, part of the generation right now. Recently my youngest was, my 8-year-old, was running around the house saying, OMA, OMA. And I'm like racking my brain, I'm like, what the heck is OMA? And so I stopped her and I asked her, what is OMA? And she looks at me and she's like, you don't know? And I'm like, no. So she said, it's oh my Allah.
which Allah is the Arabic word for God. And in her mind, she didn't fully make the transition from the Arabic word of God to God. So these are the types of linguistic elements that we begin to understand in a culture. And that we see, and when I asked her, she said, all my friends say that, And so we see that this language is adopted, but I wouldn't have known that if I wasn't around my child. So how do you do your research? Assuming you can't find a family that will take you in for a month, what else do you do? Again, social media is a beautiful thing. One of my adult books that I've been working on for quite some time now, and I've been kind of holding on to tightly because I keep revising and revising, is called Voices of the Arab Spring. And it's a chronicle of the 18 different countries that went through the Arab Spring. And I've collected different stories from individuals who live in those countries. And when I first started this project, I began to reach out to people on social media. I followed some people on Twitter, I found them on Facebook, those who were prolific, who were writing blogs, who had things to say. And every single person that I contacted had a story to share. And they wanted to share that story. And because this book is now transitioning into a companion copy of a YA or an NG, I'll be traveling this summer actually to Jordan and Syria to interview some of the children in the orphanages there, in the refugee camps and in the medical clinics. And I'm hoping that in that way, even though I can say that I am of the Muslim faith, even though I can say that I speak the Arabic language, I know that I need to be there to experience the stories that I want to share. That in order to find the authentic voice, I need to know what it's really like. And I know we don't always have that opportunity, but there are ways that we can connect with others who do have that opportunity and who are able to go that extra mile and find out and share with you what is on their mind. One of the fears that we often see in this trek for we need diverse books is sometimes the idea of the white man's burden.
And for those of you who are familiar with Rudyard Kipling's poem, you know that he spoke about this white man's burden, this idea that we need to save the world. And our ethnocentrism as Americans often puts us in that position to think that we're here to save all those who can't save themselves. I cannot tell you how many times I've been approached and told, I can liberate you from the impression that you are living under. And my response is always like, do I look like an oppressed woman to you? But this is something that we have grown up with, this idea that we have to save the world. You don't have to save the world. You just have to tell its stories. Some of the books that have always spoken to me in terms of, diversity, in terms of telling stories of other worlds that I may not know, that I may not have lived but want to experience. These are just a few of the books that have spoken to me, and I'm sure there's many, many more out there that you love reading and that have spoken to you. But I remember when I read Memoirs of a Geisha, I had to keep going back to look at the author's name, Arthur Golden, because I was like, is this a pen name? He knows the culture so well. And I kept thinking this has to be a geisha in disguise who's written this book, because it was so beautifully told, and because it was so culturally relevant. And this is the authenticity that we strive for in our writing, that connection that we can have with a diverse audience while speaking from the voice of that diverse audience. Now, the impact of our words, of course, we all know, when we have that book out there, we've written that blog post, we've written an article, and someone comes back to us and says, that changed my life. What you wrote, it affected me. It impacted me. And as writers, I think that's probably the strongest words that we could ever hear. And as artists also, when we draw or we paint or we create something, and we put it out in the world, and we get that feedback that it affected someone, we know that we've made a difference. And so we have to ask ourselves sometimes, do the words create our world, or does the world create our words? And I tend to be on the side of the theory of sociolinguistic relativity, that our words create our world. Because it's what we choose to put on paper that tells the stories of those around us. It's what we choose to put out there in the world that becomes a priority, that becomes important. Just a few days ago, this book was released. It's Ramadan, Curious George. Ramadan is the month of fasting for Muslims, and it begins on Monday, actually. And Aisha Saeed, the author of Written in the Stars, a book that I posted in that panorama that I had just briefly before, she said that when she received her box of books, her 5-year-old son picked up this book.
And he looked at it for quite some time. And then he turned to her and opened his eyes wide and whispered, "Does that mean Curious George knows about me?" And this is the connection that our diverse books can bring to the world. You know, just yesterday, a great leader, an icon, someone that is well known and beloved to so many, Muhammad Ali, the boxer, passed away. And my son woke up in the morning, and he was listening, we had the news on, and my husband and I were speaking about it, and he said to me, "Wow, my name is all over today." And it was the first time that my son could say that, my 12-year-old son could say that in a positive light. And I saw him kind of, puff out his chest a little bit, and he kept, boxing his little sister all day long. But he felt something. He felt a connection. For once, he felt his name was associated on the news with something that was being celebrated, rather than someone that was being condemned. And that made a difference to him. Now, Muhammad Ali has some beautiful quotes, and one of my favorites is this one. "It's the lack of faith that makes people afraid of meeting challenges, and I believe in myself." And that's what we all need to do. Because as I looked around this weekend at the beautiful art that was displayed, as I looked around at the authors, the illustrators, the writers, the ones who are just beginning their journeys and the ones who are already far into their journeys, as I look around today even at all of you who are sitting here, I know that we all have stories to tell. I know that we all have something to say. We all have something to share with the world. And you don't know what it is that you may share that will change someone's life, that will lift a child out of that yearning for blonde hair and blue eyes, and make that person believe that they are just not good enough, but they are good, and that they deserve to be here in this world. And that's the power of writing. That's the power of drawing. That's the power of creating, because we have that gift to be able to give it to the world. So don't give up, and don't keep quiet, because your story has to be told. And I just want to end by sharing a poem with you from one of my favorite authors, from Pablo Neruda, and the poem is called "Keeping Quiet." "Now we will count to 12, and we will all keep still. For once on the face of the earth, let's not speak in any language. Let's stop for 1 second and not move our arms so much. It would be an exotic moment, without rush, without engines. We would all be together in a sudden strangeness. Fishermen in the cold sea would not harm whales, and the man gathering salt would look at his hurt hands. Those who prepare green wars, wars with gas, wars with fire, victories with no survivors, would put on clean clothes and walk about with their brothers in the shade, doing nothing. What I want should not be confused with total inactivity. Life is what it is about. I want no truck with death. If we were not so single-minded about keeping our lives moving, and for once could do nothing, perhaps a huge silence might interrupt this sadness of never understanding ourselves and of threatening ourselves with death. Perhaps the earth can teach us, as when everything seems dead and later proves to be alive. Now I'll count up to 12, and you keep quiet, and I will go. Thank you.